I'm currently teaching as a primary school teacher, so I'm used to teaching primary school people, as you'd expect from that. And normally at the beginning of lessons, I very much have always tried to avoid saying good morning everybody, or good morning year one, because it always results in the same thing it did when I was at school, which is they just kind of barrel off into good morning everybody, or good morning Mr. Bauer, good morning everyone. They say hello to me. And I made the mistake once of doing that when there were 3 teachers in the room, so they had to say hello to everyone and good morning everybody in between each one as well. I don't know why I'm telling you that story, that just kind of came to mind then. Last time I preached, Malcolm gave me this really difficult passage in Habakkuk, where it was all kind of God's judgment, and then the next week he got to do about God's reconciliation afterwards. Now today's given me a much nicer passage, in that it's all about God's promises, it's all quite exciting and nice. But at the same time, it's quite a massive passage. It's one that a lot of commentators see as one of the defining passages of the Bible, one of the key texts that we look at. And I've got a feeling LST students probably did an essay on it as well. So I've got that thrown in just to make, so I don't feel too comfortable doing it. I found a great quote from somebody when he's writing about Abraham. He says, the figure of Abraham, or Abram, as he is initially known, dominates the book of Genesis and casts a shadow which extends across the whole Bible. So it's quite an important passage that hopefully we shall be able to do some justice to this morning. Now, as a clarification, Susie at the beginning rightly said, that Abraham is also called Abram, and he changes his name at some point. And his initial name, I think I'm right in saying, means exalted father, as Abram, and then he becomes Abraham, which is father of many, or father of a multitude. But contrary to Susie, who's just told you that she's going to try and use Abraham the whole service, I'm going to try and use Abram for the whole sermon. But please don't get confused. There's not lots of different people. In the same way, Sarah starts her life as Sarai, with an I rather than a H at the end. Again, there's not 4 people I'm speaking about, it's just 2. But with the Sarah thing, I'll probably call her Sarah because it's easier. And I'm never sure about the pronunciation of Sarai. So let's have a little look at the text. So if you'd like to open your Bibles. And I'd like to start actually, if we just look, just to kind of refresh our minds about the text after Rob read it. If we start from chapter 11, verse 27. And I'm quite a fan of trying to understand the context of the historical context that the Bible is written in. But also you need to have an understanding of what if you're being technical, you call the co-text, which is just the text around the text you're looking at. Often the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, they use the word therefore lots of times, which normally means you need to look at the bit beforehand to see what the therefore is on the back of. And this also gives us a lot of interesting information. So, we'll start from verse 27. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, if our wonderful technology works, I thought I'd put up a little map so we can see where they went. There's lots of things on the map. I couldn't find one just of Abram's journey. But we can see where he starts in Ur over here, which is this bit. The red line's the important one. The other ones are people like Joseph and Jacob, in fact. So we're not up to Jacob yet, just Abram at the moment. So he starts in Ur in Chaldea, which is modern-day Iraq, and goes through Babylon. I mean, where exactly he went, they kind of make it up. But the assumption is generally he's going to stay in between those 2 big rivers, because that's where the land's nice, rather than walking into the desert. And then they end up in Haran. Now, there's a few really interesting things in that passage. First of all, slightly incidental thing, but the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. The fact that it's telling you Terah's died is not because he dies before the rest of it happens. In fact, we reckon he died only 2 years before Abraham's wife. So he's actually alive for a lot of this story, but he doesn't really feature in it. So the author of Genesis just thinks, well, we'll kind of get him out of the way now. He's not really very important. So he's done. He's done in this story. So he just talks about the fact he's died, which is nice. The other thing that's much more important is in the middle of this genealogy, genealogy is just a big list of names of this person was the father of this person was the father of this person. And the Bible writers do seem to quite enjoy putting in the odd genealogy here and there. But bizarrely, they break this one up in the middle with the sentence, now Sarai was barren, she had no child. They kind of put something in the middle. Now, whenever a Hebrew writer would break up a genealogy, that's because they were trying to make a really kind of important point. They wanted you to know that Sarah was barren and how important this was. Now, obviously, that would be important in any culture, but particularly in those days, that meant effectively that the family line wouldn't be able to continue. As a woman in that society, that was kind of going to be her main job occupation. That's what she was expected to do. And all of a sudden, she's kind of lost a lot of what she would have seen as her identity because she can't have a child and fulfill her role as a mother. And also that means that then they've got no children to look after them in old age. They obviously didn't have a pension system. There are nomadic people kind of wandering around, so pensions weren't around then. And as well, in the culture, particularly where they came from originally in Iraq, at the time they had a culture of, basically they had to be buried by their children, and children had to say certain things to make sure that it went well with them as they died. So that was a really important thing for them. But it's kind of trying to make the point that this is going to be a really important part of the story. And if you think about it, if we move on to the next passage, when we start looking at the promises of God, it makes the promises of God seem all that bit more ridiculous. They seem quite huge anyway, but in the context of the fact that Sarah is barren, they seem all the more surprising. So, the one other thing that we know about Terah, by the way, as well, is that it says in the book of Joshua that he worshipped other gods. It doesn't say what gods, it just said that he worshipped other gods. So he didn't know the God that we know. He didn't know Yahweh. And it seems that all of a sudden Abraham gets this God talking to him. And this is what God decides to say. Let's just check if I'm actually where I should be in my notes. More or less. More or less. Okay. So, now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonours you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now, if we could have the next slide up. This is the kind of order that it happens in. In fact, let's not even bother with that. Let's just skip straight to the next one. And there's something that really interesting that some commentators have picked out with this passage, is the fact that it uses the Hebrew kind of word for bless 5 times. And some clever people have worked out that it also uses the Hebrew word for curse 5 times up to this point in Genesis, in these verses, just to prove that they're actually there. You can check them if you really want to, but not now. And they're making the point that this is really, God's always had a plan of salvation. He's always knew what was going to happen. But this is the kind of point where he really gets the ball rolling. This is the point where actually this kind of 5-fold blessing is counteracting the curse that has been on the earth since the fall beforehand, which is something I found quite interesting. The other really interesting and really important thing to grasp is the order that these blessings come in. So it starts quite personal. It starts just with Abraham. I will make you a great nation and bless you. So although it's the fact of him being a nation, it's very direct to Abraham in particular. After that, I'll make your name great so that you will be a blessing. So then Abraham is to bless others. Now, the way it kind of talks about it is probably in the way he becomes synonymous with blessing. So somebody would say, wow, you're so blessed. You're like Abraham, that kind of thing. So he's going to be so blessed that people are going to talk about him as almost like a kind of term for blessing. Then it moves on to say, I will bless those who bless you. So it's kind of moving outwards a little bit. It's kind of radiating out from Abraham. So Abraham's blessed. Then his name will be great so that you will be a blessing. Then he will bless those who bless Abraham. And finally, in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So it starts from just this one person and comes up with this absolutely incredible statement that although your wife is barren, and God obviously is aware of this, that all of the families of the entire earth are going to be blessed through his name, through his line of people. And this was meant to always be the model for Israel as they moved on through history. So if you go to the next slide, this is a very exciting graphic that I came up with, where you can see at the middle we've got Abraham, a great nation, and it kind of spreads out all the way through the families of the earth. It's all right, you don't really have to move, it's not that exciting. But so it kind of radiates out, and that's always the idea. Now, that was the idea for Israel as they went through history, that they were to be a light to the Gentiles, a light to the nations around them. So they saw how a nation could live with God and for God, how God could bless them. And they were going to think, yeah, this seems pretty good. I might try and join in with that. Likewise, I think that's actually a really good model for us as the church, that as God blesses us, so those blessings are meant to radiate out. They're not meant to stop at us. We're not meant to think, yes, we're in the club, we're done. It's meant that those blessings will kind of naturally spread out to other people. And ultimately, this was fulfilled. Bless all the families of the earth through him was, of course, fulfilled through Jesus, who is kind of coming down that same line eventually. That Jesus gives us access to the Father as people that weren't Jewish. We're not in the line of Abraham, but we've been grafted in. We've been allowed to know God because of what Jesus has done. So ultimately, this comes to fruition a few thousand years later and kind of continues to be outworked through the church nowadays. So those are some things that I found really interesting. The other thing, that when you put it in the context of the chapter before is the Tower of Babel story, which I don't think we've looked at. So if you just want to turn back to chapter 11. And there's a really interesting contrast between the idea of what the people making the Tower of Babel thought was going to be great and what God tells us is to be great. It's very different things. So, where are we? I thought I'd turn the page over, I haven't. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is the only beginning of what they will do." And I will stop the reading there. And what's very interesting is at the time, if we go to the next slide, it will come back up with the map. So the people of Babylon, they were very kind of, we're at the centre of the earth. And this kind of story, they're almost poking fun at the people of Babylon. They're saying, you're not really the centre of the earth. You've kind of got a bit of an inflated view of yourself. So you're not really actually as important as you think. And they had all these kind of towers and things that they kind of saw as, reaching up to the heavens. And there's this hilarious bit in this story in Babel where God actually has to come down just to see their tower. So it's obviously not really reached the heavens if God, who can see anything anyway, but he's depicted as coming down from the heavens to have a little look to see, oh, this is what they're doing on their little earth. This is what they're doing. And it's kind of poking fun at the Babylonians and obviously the people of Babel directly. And there's a sense in which we still do this today. We still think that we can build great things, we can create amazing things, we can do things that make us great, because what we're trying to do is make ourselves look great in the sight of other people. And God is very much flipping this on his head when he's talking to Abram, this single person, him and his wife and his nephew, kind of wandering around, moving through into Israel, as you can see from Haran all the way down. And he's wandering through, and actually he's saying, your name is going to be great, not because because you're going to build a big tower, because you're going to do all these things, you're just living in a tent. That's not the point. The point is that I will bless you, and you're going to be great because I am going to bring out my blessings through your name. I'm going to use you for my purposes. And that's what it means to be great, not to be great in our own eyes, but for God to be seen as great through what we do. So, I've just put a little question here, which says, we may seem amazing to our contemporaries, but are we allowing God to define us and to define our standards and aims in life? Which I think is a much more important thing to do. Let's carry on. So verse 4, so Abram went as the Lord had told him, which is a very stark comment, really, when you think, That's quite a big thing. He's obviously walking for quite some distance. And Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's sons, and all their possessions that they gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go into the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh, and at that time the Canaanites were in the land. So it's very easy when we read this to think, this is kind of all happening instantaneously. Of course it's not. It's probably, in the space of a few pages you're going through, 100 years of history. I don't know if it's 100 years, I just made that up. But the point is you're going through quite a long time. So he's got plenty of time to kind of think on these promises and think, hang on, did God really say that? Did I actually hear somebody claiming to be God that I've not really understood before, saying that he's going to make a great nation through me? And at the same time, as I said, Terah would worship other gods. And imagine being in that situation. Imagine Abram goes to his dad and says, Dad, I'm going to leave, probably never going to see you again for the rest of your life or mine, because God told me to. Now, in our context, that would be quite weird, and I think it'd probably be quite weird in their context as well. I think we can undervalue it when we think it's just so easy for Abram to go off because God's promised all these things. Yeah, he has, but at the same time, it's very easy, even when God promises things to us, for us to kind of undersell them and kind of question them a little bit. In the same way that Israelites in the desert, they had God's physical presence there. They had a cloud of fire in front of them. But yet, as soon as I'm getting all confused. As soon as Moses goes up the mountain, they think, oh, God's left us. This God that was in the cloud of fire, no, I can't remember anything about him. Let's make our own God of gold and make a cow. So they kind of get a little bit carried away, despite the fact that they've even seen God. And so it's quite likely, you'd have thought, that Abraham is going to have serious questions as he goes along, and maybe his wife as well, and Lot for that matter. But they all trek off anyway. They are obedient to God, which I think is a really amazing thing, that God's made these promises, but they've decided to believe them, that they've gone along with it, despite the fact that it seems very odd. Now, when they get to the land of Canaan, this land that God has promised them, we have this little sentence, which is very easy to miss. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land, which seems a very kind of blunt, obvious statement. But the writer, again, he's just making a point that Abraham, he's got there, but there's no way that he's going to be able to take control of this land. He can't take possession of a land that's already inhabited. It's already got people there. So if I was Abraham arriving there, I'd probably assume I'm going to arrive into a big, nice, empty land that I can kind of spread out in, and nobody's going to bother me, and it's going to be my land, and it's going to be great. But actually he gets there and finds there's lots of people. Now what Abraham does is he kind of keeps moving through. And what's quite interesting is that I can't remember where it says that he arrives in Canaan, but basically it lists lots of different places he goes to. And the point is that he's going all the way through the land. So again, you could kind of see it as, although he hasn't physically taken possession of the land, he's kind of done it symbolically, that actually he's walked through the whole of Israel, what will become Israel, the whole of Canaan. And through that, he's kind of taken possession of the land with God's help in a symbolic way. After all this happens, just in case he was getting a little bit worried, the Lord then appears to Abraham, which I think is the first time that God's done this, really, as far as we know in Genesis. It's the first time God seems to have just turned up in a really physical form in front of somebody. And then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country of the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. So, just in case he's getting a little bit worried, it seems that God kind of interjects. So if I was him, I would still be pretty worried about, well, how am I going to take this land? My wife, she's not having any children at the moment. I'm not sure that she ever will. God, how are you going to sort this out? And he just comes and reaffirms. He doesn't say how he's going to do it. He just says, I will do it. And Abraham reacts in the best possible way. He decides to worship by building an altar, and the implication is that he probably offered sacrifice, because he didn't generally build an altar without doing that. And already at this point in history, it seems that people had understood that was the way to worship God. And obviously, if we move into our own context, our own culture, since Jesus, a lot of the words, the Hebrew words that were used in the Old Testament to mean worship, particularly in the temple or before the temple when they were worshipping using altars and sacrificing, they've kind of been translated and reused to talk about our lives. So there's that really famous passage in Romans, which I'll just turn to. You can turn to if you want. Romans 12, where it says, I appeal to you, therefore... So I was just saying at the beginning, I should probably read the bit before, but I'm not going to. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And in the same way that Abraham responded to God's revelation by worshipping, we are called to do the same. It's just that the way that we do it doesn't involve killing pigeons, which is probably a good thing, I think, because Jesus has already kind of done that part for us. But it's to offer our lives to God as a spiritual act of worship. And in the same way that Abraham worshipped a God that revealed himself to us, we worship a God that reveals himself to us too. Does that make sense? Yes, sort of. And that therefore there is really important, that we are responding to all that God has done for us, all that God has done throughout history for his people, is why we worship God. And that's almost like our only kind of sensible and right response. So, what time is it? 11:37. I've got a little bit of time. So yes, I'll just finish reading this passage. Oh. That's not Genesis, that's Romans. It's very confusing, particularly when I was at Romans 12 as well. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going towards the Negev. So he kind of moves to this like sort of deserty area towards the bottom. Which to me I find quite funny, because if he's moving towards a deserty area, and then the next sentence is, now there was a famine in the land, well, he's just moved into the desert. It's quite... I'm not sure if that's a point in the text, but it just kind of strikes me as quite funny. We'll just quickly look at this section as well. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know you're a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they'll say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful, and when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Now it seems that Abram has kind of lost the plot a little bit here. So rather than continuing to trust God and thinking, God will protect me, he goes into the land and kind of tells what is actually a sort of a half-truth because I think Sarah's actually his half-sister. They hadn't had all the laws in there, but it's still a bit weird. It was his half-sister. And one of the other things that's really strange about it is the fact that we reckon Sarah was probably about 65 at this stage, but still got kind of into the harem of the Egyptians. Now, there's lots of ideas that people have put forward as to why they found her so attractive, but I'm not going to bore you with those because they're not that interesting. You can talk to me afterwards if you're really interested. But it seems that his plan, as often is the case, goes wrong. It's like he tells this one little lie that actually it's his sister, and the idea was never to involve Pharaoh in it at all. That was just what happened. But that's where it really goes wrong. So what we reckon he probably did was think, I'll pretend that I'm her brother, and then when people, think, I want to marry this woman, I can say, yes, of course you can, and then kind of put them off. Basically just, keep saying, it may be in another couple of years, and then they would leave, and it would all be fine. But once Pharaoh gets involved, he can't really say no. So he's got himself into a bit of a pickle. And when Abram entered and for her sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. Now, Abraham isn't recorded as making any response to this. And all of a sudden, actually, whereas Abraham should be the person, he's the person that's going to be this great nation, he's going to stand on God's promises, he's kind of gone a bit off the rails. And actually, it takes Pharaoh kind of to be almost the moral person in the situation and say, why are you doing, like, you know what you should be doing, why are you doing it? And the fact that we get no response from Abraham is very telling, that he probably thought, yeah, I've really messed up here, I've really made a big mistake. And then he goes back up from Egypt, which this is a really random aside, but he always talks about going up to Egypt, up from Egypt and down to Egypt in the Bible. And that's not because they're thinking north and south, it's because Canaan was hilly, or Israel was hilly, whereas Egypt's quite flat, so they always think of it going down. But there goes, there's a nice little additional thing for you at the end of the sermon. But I find that really intriguing, that even though he's messed up and it's taken somebody else to shake him out of that and say, look, what are you doing? He still goes on, and we know that all those promises that were made to Abraham are fulfilled, that they have been fulfilled, and that they continue to be fulfilled all at the same time, simultaneously. And that God's still working out his plan today, that he makes those promises to us, that actually to be great is not to be great at all. It's not us trying to be great, but the thing we should be seeking is God, to be blessed by God. He's blessed us in so many ways, and it's then for us to let those blessings radiate out to each other, to our friends, to our work colleagues, to the wider community, and ultimately to the world. And that's kind of, the whole story that continues. It started all this time ago with Abraham. That's when the kind of ball of salvation really started rolling. But it's still kind of going on. That's an awful, awful sentence, but I'm going to stick with it.